Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. We are very happy to have you today for a new webinar, and very glad to have a new topic today, establish best-in-class supplier management process to mitigate fraud risks. We are organizing this webinar with Deloitte, and Harish is here today. Harish, good morning.
Good morning. Can you all hear me okay?
Absolutely. Fine for me. And we'll take a few moments to let everybody join the call today. And we'll go through the administrative part and let you know all the details. Like, first thing is this webinar is recorded. So if you miss anything, if your team could not make it, or you want to share this great content after the webinar with your team or anyone else, you will be able to do it. But as well, we want to make this very collaborative. So you can use the question tab, and as well we'll share a few polls with you to get your sense of and your opinion about the topics that we discuss. If no question and if we don't have time to answer the questions, no worries, we will take the time after the session to answer all the questions, and happy to reach out later in the day or in the coming days. So today we have Harish Kumbhare from Deloitte. Harish, please, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Harish Kumbhare, Managing Director based out of Deloitte Houston office here. Been with Deloitte for about 16 plus years and doing supply chain and sourcing and procurement transformation for many clients. Some of my clients are also on the call here. Absolutely very passionate about this topic here today. We are discussing, I think there's a need of an hour to act on this, and we'll talk through various different ways to do that. So really excited to join this with Baptiste here, and looking forward for a very insightful conversation.
Thank you, Harish. Welcome. My name is Baptiste Collot, co-founder and CEO at Trustpair. So I've been working in the finance and treasury world for a while. I've been a treasurer for half a decade before co-founding Trustpair back in 2017. And what is really great, and this fraud topic exists for years and years. And I love the fact that we see more and more attention on this topic. Maybe it's not a good thing because it shows that fraud is really a heavier problem than it has ever been in the past. But really great to see that this topic is being discussed as very high levels, and the collaboration we have with Deloitte ensuring that typically very large companies can be best in class in their fraud prevention and think over the whole entire procure-to-pay process is super important. Today, we prepared an agenda to allow you to understand the challenges that we see on the market, what's really happening in terms of threats and what evolved over the last years, how the source to pay is impacted, and where fraud usually happens in the source to pay process. We are discussing a very specific type of fraud, which is a vendor payment fraud or third-party payment fraud. And you will understand that you need to have a comprehensive view and understanding about where are the threats on this P2P process. It's not like a single answer that can solve all the issues. How we help companies to be fraud-proof all over this source-to-pay process with Trustpair, and how we collaborate with Deloitte to support companies in their transformation journey and to reach this best-in-class status. Of course, as I said, we want to make it collaborative, so feel free to ask any question and answer the polls. You might not be familiar with Trustpair, so happy to say a few words. Trustpair were really the enterprise-grade platform when it comes to vendor payment fraud prevention. We have been around for 8 years. We grew our roots in Europe before being global and with offices both in the US. I'm based out of New York and in Europe, of course. The main reason why companies choose Trustpair is really because they want a one-stop shop when it comes to vendor payment fraud prevention, typically a global reach. A large volume of vendors, so the idea is to provide the ability to control bank account ownership in all the countries where they have a business presence, but as well to cover the entire procure to pay process. And we do this by allowing this and typically integration from Trustpair to procurement, finance, and treasury systems. You see a couple of logos, and we will touch about that. We are very proud of like the service we provide to our client, the retention and the quality, I think, of our clients. We are industry agnostic. We work with companies in any industry. Fraud is a concern for everybody, so typically we are as agnostic as fraudster. We'll touch on the current market challenge, and typically, Harish, I think you will provide the overall view about what is happening today in the market and in all the discussion that you have with your clients, and based on what the market watch that you have, how can you share this with our audience today?
Absolutely, and I think majority of these market forces, which is driving some of these behavior, will resonate with most of the audience here. There are quite a few, and this is not an exhaustive list of the market forces which is driving some of those fraudulent behavior. Right, suppliers are increasingly facing economic pressure to stay cost competitive in a highly volatile market around us. There are several regulatory environmental policies which are sort of rapidly evolving, and that's leading to several inconsistent enforcement of those regulations, and that's leaving some of the room behind for encouraging some of this behavior among our supplier community. Majority of the business operates at the backdrop of the global supply chain, which can potentially have several tiers of suppliers and the third parties to fulfill our demand, and that makes it the whole supply chain undoubtedly complex to operate within, right? And there could be several unforeseen challenges internally within suppliers' organization, which might encourage some of these behaviors as well. Unfortunately, these market forces will continue to evolve and continue to expand beyond the list we provided here, and that will lead to these fraudulent transactions. And then if we don't have a rightful mechanism, a systematic mechanism to sort of counter some of these behaviors, it can potentially result into a variety of various different business impact. And that can range from financial loss, the reputation damage, supply chain disruption, and I can go on and on. But I think it is critical to sort of reflect back on these market situation as we are in today, and which is sort of leaving the room for such a fraudulent behavior, and that can cause some of these significant impact to our business, right? With that, let me pass it on to Baptiste to sort of talk about where in the sourcing and procurement we can surgically see some of these behaviors, and how we can surgically act on this with Trustpair. So over to you, Baptiste.
Yeah, thank you. And it's clear that over the last years, the evolution of fraud, both in terms of the volume of attacks, the quality of attacks, has been really driven by everything you just mentioned, meaning that companies have to watch many new risks. The volume of vendors, the turnover in the vendors' relationship, etc., the massive disruptions that happened over the last years really drove an opportunity to fraudster to really increase their reach, increase their ability to impersonate vendors and third parties, and that drive the figures that we see today. Basically, we annually make a survey about like the trend and what is happening on large companies when it comes to vendor payment fraud. And the last figures has been released a couple of weeks ago. We wanted to share two main figures here. The first one is also it's really focused on large companies based in the US. So people that have been interviewed by Cint, which is a survey poll specialist, showed that 90% of US companies have been targeted by cyber fraud in 2024. And out of these 90%, 40% of them say that they lost more than 10 million in this kind of fraud. It was really surprising to us because the increase compared to the previous year was absolutely huge. And so the people and the respondent of the survey, who are mainly directors, VP, and C levels in procurement, finance, and treasury teams of US large companies, were very clear about the new kind of fraud. This is something that we saw. Basically, what happened over the last years is really the combination of a higher cyber risk. Typically, cyber attacks are way more complex than they used to be, plus the adoption of AI by fraudster. That makes impersonification way easier for them. And a lot of the people who answered to this survey reported that the use of AI in the fraud schemes that they detected was really, really high. Meaning that there is a high question about, like a real question about how can you be sure that when you control vendor data, especially in the context of controlling a bank account, how can you be sure that you're talking to the right person? How can you be sure that the historical process that you have in place, typically you try to make a callback, you try to confirm a bank account, but well, you don't know if the phone number is correct. You don't know if the person you're talking to is the right one or not. That's really the consequence of both the raise of the risk of the cyber risk and the adoption of AI by fraudster, and we'll touch on that later, but which is really, really critical and make frauds more complex to identify, but as well the loss really, really more important with this. Like for 40% of companies who lost money, more than 10 million was the lost value. Harish, any comment on this, or in the discussion you have with your clients?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think in addition to the financial loss, I think we'll probably see the response from the poll, but I think it's a reputational damage that goes along with the financial loss. I think that's one of the biggest one. As we also do a annual CPO survey, and that comes out to be a major highlight or major concern from CPO's perspective, that it is definitely a cause of concern. In addition to the financial loss, it's a big reputational loss as well.
Yeah. So there's a real question about why fraud and when fraud happens. And so typically at Trustpair, at the very beginning, we come from more the treasury world because treasurer used to be the person in charge of saying, hey, we are in charge of securing payments. And the discussion over years is broader and broader, and now includes everybody on the procure to pay chain. And CPOs, procurement people, are really at like the front line when it comes to fraud prevention today. And so why that is really, when you think about where fraud happens on the procure to pay chain, typically we identify three main points of threat. The first one is clearly when you onboard a vendor, or when you receive a change request this is the first time that you need to control the data. Typically, what we see today is manual controls, callbacks, just sending back an email, try to get an answer from a bank. It's very, very complex. We clearly have, from the discussion that we have with our clients, the challenge of doing this locally is real because of the volume and because of the technicity of cyber attacks. Business email compromise is still the main way of that fraudster use, combined with usually, as I said, AI, etc. So classic fraud scheme is someone in the procurement team, in the vendor master data team, in the AP team, or in the treasury team will receive an email saying, hey, we changed the bank account. This email looks legit. The email domain used to send this email is legit because the cyber attack happened at the vendor level. And so it's really tricky because this is an email address you use to communicate with. But suddenly you cannot trust the information you receive from your main contact and the contact you have in this company. This is how the vast majority of frauds occur or start. And then, of course, you have the AI used to make sure that emails are filled with the right context based on the historical discussions. But as well, if you need to call back, and you might call back the phone number in the email or on the invoice, etc., the voice will be impersonate. So you believe you're talking to the right person, but you're not. That's really the tricky thing. Vendor onboarding, bank changing at this stage. Making sure that the control is done is as well a big challenge. All the time for like any company, there is a process in place. Like someone has to call back. But each time there is a fraud, usually the process could not be respected because just controlling data is not the only thing that any procurement or finance team has to do on a daily basis. Many other things, many other tasks has to be done on a normal day. And so just one fail, one undone check or verification is when fraud happens. So this is really the first step, and you understand that this is the first of these three coming one. When the data has been used or has been controlled, it is hosted in ERPs usually or in master data, where this data is let as is. So typically, vendor data is outdated very, very fast. You don't know what you don't know. This is the main challenges when it comes to vendor data. A company can have changed the bank account but didn't share this information with you. Maybe the company doesn't exist anymore, etc. You need to. There is a real risk, and combined with the risk of internal mistakes, but as well internal fraud is a reality that companies don't want to talk that much because, of course, you trust the people you work with. But internal fraud is a reality in any in any company. Doesn't mean that you have always internal fraud, but on the life of a company, this is usually a reality. And then the use of this data in the context of the payment is actually when you lose the money because you sent the payment to the wrong bank account. At the very end, here it's like different teams. You understand that from the very beginning, the team onboarding the vendors, procurement team, the master data team, AP, who is in charge of changing the data sometimes or just initiating the payments, and treasury being the one who might push the payment to the bank. So many different teams with no way to collaborate effectively to make sure that the process was respected. This is the reason why fraud happens in P2P process, because of the complexity of this process, of the multiple teams involved, of the multiple tools involved. Usually we like to see it this way. When you think about fraud, you have three components that you have to have in mind. The data itself, how this data is controlled, the people, so the teams in charge of controlling this data, and the tools that we host the data and that will be used by the teams. So you need these three components to think about the three components when you think about fraud over the P2P process: data, people, and tools. Harish, do you want to touch on this based on the discussion you have with your client and the risks you identify, especially at the procurement level, maybe?
Yeah, one point I would like to highlight is we may ultimately trace it back, the payment, fraudulent payment, right? But I think the major disruption it causes throughout the operation, which touches multiple parties. I think that's a huge sort of nuance of this whole tracing it back and identifying and getting that money back, right?
Yeah. So typically, how you can solve this issue, how you can manage the risk. This is what we do with Trustpair. Basically, we'll try to cover these 3 points, like the data, how you control this data, how you automate and you switch from manual controls to automated controls. And the validation we do at Trustpair are always following 3 main steps. The first one is to validate the third-party identity. Why? Because typically you don't want to pay or to control a bank account that you would associate with a company that you didn't validate. You want to make sure that this is the business you're doing or the vendor you're doing business with. So this is the first component of any evaluation done by Trustpair. The second one is the bank account itself. Is this bank account safe? Can you pay this bank account? Would you face any risk associated with the country sanctions and typically a payment rejection just by using the wrong format, for example? The third point is, of course, the ownership, making sure that the bank account belongs to this company. And by doing these 3 checks, we ensure that you face no risk. Basically, if any of these steps fail, we will deliver an unfavorable evaluation. We'll explain you what we found, all the details that we enrich about the company, the bank account, and the risk signals associated with this data. That's the first part. How we validate the data. We don't do any magic at Trustpair. So typically, we will automate what can be automated. We provide the largest coverage because we aggregate a high volume of data and methodologies. Typically, to control this data, we'll go directly to the banks. We'll connect to the banks and bank networks, etc., to be able to ask them directly if a bank account belongs to a company. We do this on a daily basis. We go to and we connect to new data sources and new banks. This is not enough because banks are not always available. If you just take, for example, Canada, Canadian banks are really not open to share data today. So you need to find another way. This is how we fill the gap with when there is no data available. First thing is we will help our clients by ensuring that they have access to what we call the Trustpair network. Typically, any vendors that we vetted in the past will share it with our community, making sure that typically a check that has been done before can benefit to all the rest of the community. So we pull this data. This allows us as well to identify and to when a risk is identified on a third party or on a bank account, well, to share it with the rest of the community. When there is a high risk or when there is no data available, we will proceed to some additional controls to making sure that we can connect with the vendor or third party in a safe way to validate the bank account. And if not possible, be able to trigger a penny test validation for smaller vendors or again, when data is not available. That's how we provide a coverage in 190 countries. This is everything that we can automate. But if you want to be fraud proof, what you need is just not to automate, is to handle securely what cannot be automated or the high risk. Trustpair will allow you to do this safely by delivering some case management features, typically allowing that you can take the right decision when a risk is identified, or for companies that can't be confirmed, making sure that all the controls are done on the Trustpair platform with some safe workflow processes, etc., that will allow you to make sure that no control is done out of Trustpair, and so making sure that 100% of vendors are in the radar and can be paid safely. This is so how we validate. Then the question is where you need to bring this evaluation. We help you to bring this evaluation at the right time, at the right place in the procure to pay process. Typically, vendor onboarding, we will automate the bank account ownership validation, making sure that you divide by 10. This is in average what we see for our clients. And so the time you spend on controls, that you have a full traceability on the controls that has been done within your organization, anywhere in the organization, and with a consolidated view. The second point is to make sure that the data in the ERP, in the master data, wherever it is, but the vendor database is safe on a daily basis. Continuous monitoring is critical to ensure that the data that will be used for payment is safe. Here we will touch on two things. Cover the internal risk, meaning that the risk that someone internally in your company change the data, like for a fraudulent reason or because it's an error, etc. But as well, fill the gap with what you don't know, alerting you each time there is an error that is identified. Typically, a bank account is closed, a company is closed, or any risk identified. Typically, we will alert you directly and in real time to make sure that you don't pay this vendor and you can proceed to additional checks and verification internally. And of course, in the context of a payment, so later on in the process, any payment file can be scanned by Trustpair to, again, validate that the bank account belongs to a vendor, but as well identify some risk associated with the execution, duplicates, abnormal amounts, abnormal behaviors, and again, filling the gap between all the teams, making sure that from procurement to AP, treasury, master data team, there is one single tool, which is the base of trust, basically, that everybody can rely on. And so really breaking the silos in over the P2P. And of course, integrating this in your systems from with native integration or API project or SFTP project to cover the entire process and make sure that basically you streamline the whole process and you cover the risk on the entire process. Harish, I'm sure you have a few comments on this.
I may have a few comments on the next slide, so want to quickly.
And so here, I think what is really important again is just not only to automate, but allowing our client to take the right decision, to know what they don't know. And today, clearly, the quality of the vendor master data, the quality of the controls that are done is not sufficient to prevent fraud. That's what we bring. For all the persons doing controls on a daily basis, we'll, of course, automate this, brings the visibility, who is doing what is the risk identified, allowing with some risk signals to understand why we believe there is a risk. Just not saying, hey, red alert, find the why. No, we'll explain you why we believe there is a risk to make the process efficient and allow the right decision at the end. Maybe you will still pay this bank account. Maybe you won't pay it, but at least you need to take the right decision to avoid fraud. And at the executive and management level, what is really important is when we discuss with treasurer, CFO, or exec in general, CPO, they don't know what's happening in their team. They don't know the risk associated with data, which is absolutely critical today. Outdated data, fraudulent data is a key issue. And so with dashboards and live alerts, etc., we allow them to take back the control on this risk. Maybe it was not this one, Harish, that you had in mind. I wanted to comment.
No, I do. Before we go there, I think having that visibility to all of those fraudulent transactions or alerts, I think that's critical, right? I mean, then it's very easy for us to sort of act on it. Having that upfront of the dashboard, that's really helpful from a procurement stakeholder perspective. But yeah, let me go quickly on how we can enable this with the Deloitte. Right. As you all know, Deloitte has been the leader for supply chain transformation over several decades now across several technology ERP applications. And we also do deeply appreciate that our clients are at the different stages of their transformation journey. However, looking at the gravity of this fraudulent transaction and its impact, addressing it in a timely fashion need not be a very long-term goal, and it can be actually done with a very rapid assessment of your current state situation, agnostic of whatever the ERP applications you have at the backdrop, right? Deloitte offers a very comprehensive source-to-pay procurement process framework, which allows us to surgically identify where those opportunities for potential fraudulent transactional behaviors are, and then we can bridge those gaps with the Trustpair with the least disruption to your existing technology ecosystem, and regardless of what stage of transformation you are in. With our universal integration playbook, even if the ERPs are changing in the backdrop, we can ensure the seamless transition of Trustpair engagement to a new ERP, so we don't drop the ball and continue to monitor and prevent those fraudulent transactions as that happens. With that, do you want to go over the subscription model?
Sure. And before that, I mean, what is really important and why this is key and this collaboration is absolutely key is usually any company is well aware of the issue of fraud, but the ownership is not clear about who needs to take the lead, how to start the fraud prevention journey, etc. And I think this collaboration is really productive for Deloitte's clients is really about, okay, we'll start maybe and we'll have full understanding about what can be done, how we can start maybe small, but just don't delay these topics, because delaying these fraud prevention topics is just increasing the risk over time. And so being able to jump into this design phase and thinking about how to implement such a tool like Trustpair in the process is absolutely valuable. And so we have seen that with the collaboration that we had over the last quarters and years, and we clearly see the value for clients. Why this is important? Because as well as Trustpair works with large companies, we are not here to typically tell you that you need to cover the entire P2P from day one. And our engagement model is very flexible in this way, depending on what modules you will use, what are the use cases that you will need to use first within your organization. While typically our engagement model will allow you to start small with a big ambition and to make sure that while your project is more and more mature over time, you can use more widely the platform. So typically we're a SaaS platform, so with an annual, very predictable engagement model. Platform fee to access the platform itself, depending on the use case that you need, just vendor onboarding, the vendor audit or payments, and then the volume of data. It's not consumption based or transaction based. We just want to know how many vendors you have in your ERP, and that will define typically the cost for at the company level. It's important because we don't want you to think about, hey, I want to cover just half of my vendors, etc. No, you need to make sure that 100% of your vendors are covered to trigger the risk. And of course, add-ons, integration, etc., might impact this as well. We'll provide some classic service fees depending on the complexity of the projects and depending on how we work with Deloitte on and who takes what in the project.
Awesome.
That's it for us today. First overview of Trustpair and how we collaborate with Deloitte. The key message we wanted to share today is clearly the threat is here. I think figures speaks for themselves, and everybody is well aware that fraud is a key topic for any procurement and CPO and CFO team today. The question is how we can start. Well, you can start very effectively just by asking to people who did some project like this before and who can provide a great support to design a project, an effective project, without thinking of changing everything in your organization. Just by thinking about where is the right place to fit in your P2P process, and that's the great value that of this collaboration. Harish, thank you very much for your for being here today. It's always a pleasure to collaborate with you and your clients. To anyone, I think we have maybe a couple of questions that we can take with the remaining time. Thank you all for asking them. So we had a few questions. What are the common fraud schemes that we see out there? So I touched a bit on this. So typically the main fraud scheme that we see is a business email compromise. Usually the first point of contact is through an email still, or in a different case through a fake invoice or a fake phone call. I'm sure you receive on a daily basis tons of business email compromise or fraud attempts, etc. But this is clearly and still the main type of fraud that we see out there. Harish, do you want to touch on this?
Yeah, I think we talked about that. There's no one unique sort of behavior, right? There are multiple ways this fraudulent transaction can happen. And I think that's where we talked about having those surgically pinpointing throughout the source to pay process is important, because that can happen at the entry level of the vendor data, or during the life cycle of it, or at the tail end of the payment, right? So it's really a wide scope of that behavior.
First one, yeah, okay. But well, we touch on the other one, but so I think we are good on this today. Thank you everyone for attending. Always a pleasure, Harish, to have you again. Have a great day. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. Our email is here. I guess any additional question, contact us, and if you need the record, it will be available and shared with you by email in a few minutes. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.